put it in the freezer, right? Well, I think we have enough people now where we can at least, I'm going to launch some polling, which I like to do, which is to get a sense of people's familiarity with the topic. So the first question is, have you bought cryptocurrency? And the reason why I like asking this is because I think knowledge of NFTs, on the one hand, it's kind of simple, right? It's just a container, then you can put anything inside of it. On the other hand, I think to understand it, you at a more technical, deeper level, you probably want some knowledge of what blockchain is, what cryptocurrency is, what a token is on top of the cryptocurrency layer, and then you can start dividing out to, well, there's fungible tokens and there's non-fungible tokens, right? So this is pretty consistent with other events that Ken and I have been doing in the past month or two, which is it's about 50-50. So I'll end that poll. And then I'm going to run another poll, which is, have you bought or minted an NFT? So, same idea. I think the best way to understand what NFTs are is to go ahead and do it. Do it safely. Maybe don't spend a few $100,000 on it if you don't know what you're doing. But this is interesting. So it's like we got about a third settling into about a third saying, I have no idea what you're talking about. Perfect. I'm glad you're here to hopefully learn a little bit more. About half is saying, obviously there's going to be some overlap here, right, in the responses, but about half the group is saying no, but they would like to either buy or mint, which I think, hopefully we give you some more context here today, and it's going to give you some confidence going out there. And obviously, to the extent you need legal counsel in that process, we'd be happy to help give you some confidence to jump into the market if that's appropriate. Smaller percentage has already bought or minted, pretty small percentage, in fact. So there are people here that have, and hopefully they learn a little bit more about, maybe they learned from their what they already did, and we'll go from there. So Ken, maybe you want to kick it off with an intro.
Sure. So I guess we can just start with the most basic overview of what the blockchain is, what cryptocurrency is, and how tokens and NFTs kind of come into the picture. So to simplify something that's a little bit complicated into as few sentences as possible so that we get to the meat of the program. The concept of a blockchain is effectively it's a computer code that is run by a decentralized network of computers, meaning like anyone's computer can join and can process the code. As it processes the code, there is a ledger or a record of all of the transfers and transactions that have taken place on the blockchain. And the people who are running the blockchain receive tokens or cryptocurrency, whatever you want to call it, depending, as a reward for using their processing power to run the code. So at a very high level, that is what the blockchain is. That is what cryptocurrency is. But each block of the code that is produced and each reward that is produced contains a record of all of the transactions that have ever happened on that blockchain before it. So it's much easier to verify a transaction and to prevent double spending than it would be using any other current technology, at least. And the only other, I guess, institutions or people or whatever you want to say that currently do this otherwise are financial institutions like banks. So that as a high level is what crypto and blockchain is all about. Now, Bitcoin is relatively simple. It is purely a payment medium, right? I can send you a Bitcoin, you can send one back. There's a record of the back and forth, and that's it. There's nothing else that can be done with the Bitcoin blockchain. There are things like forks and whatever else, but nothing about the functionality of the code itself that differs from that core concept. But then Ethereum came along, which I believe was the first cryptocurrency to have smart contract and tokenization capabilities. Is that right, Moish, or was there one before that?
At least the most popular. I don't know if
it's definite. Yeah. Let's say
the timeline's going to be a little fuzzy here, right?
Yeah. It's definitely second only to Bitcoin in its current popularity. And it has a lot more functionality than Bitcoin. So again, you have all these computers working on this same code. Bitcoin's code is just, I sent and I received, right? You sent and I received, whatever it is. That's all it does. Ethereum's code is much more potentially complicated. It does the basic Bitcoin thing of transferring back and forth. But in addition to that, it gives the users the ability to program smart contracts, basically. Meaning you can say, okay, if I give you, if I send one Ethereum to this address, then send, X Ethereum to this address. You can kind of execute these transactions on top of the blockchain. In addition to that, you can build or you can create a kind of a link to create a token that sits on top of the blockchain. And that might be a little less artfully described than Moish might be able to do. So I want to make sure I'm not.
Sure. So tokenization means, right, that you can have within the Ethereum blockchain, on top of the Ethereum blockchain, another cryptocurrency besides. So Ethereum, ETH, would be the native payments token on Ethereum. But in addition to that, a number of different payments tokens run on the Ethereum blockchain, and the transactions that happen on that are confirmed by the Ethereum blockchain. So, for example, USDC is a token that tracks the market value of $1. So when I send Ken one USDC, it's intended that I'm sending him the equivalent of $1. And so that all happens and is confirmed by the Ethereum blockchain, separate and parallel to whether or not, I'm sending him Ethereum as that. And then the other part of that, and this is enabled by the existence of smart contract by computer code that essentially it runs itself inside the Ethereum blockchain. So the Ethereum blockchain, by enabling smart contracts, enables these complex second level transactions to occur on top of the blockchain. And so now we've been talking about tokens that are fungible, right? USDC, I send Ken $10. He can send me back $10. It doesn't matter which serial number those fungible tokens have. But when you get to non-fungible tokens, those are the unique tokens, right? Those are not currency transaction tokens necessarily. They're tokens that can represent a unique object in the digital or real world.
Right. So, effectively, you can think of it as two different types of additional code that can ride alongside the blockchain code or on top of the blockchain code through a mechanism like Ethereum. One being exactly what Moish described as the fungible tokens, which are just like regular dollars or Bitcoins or the core Ethereum cryptocurrency itself, right? If someone sends me 10 Ethereum, I don't care if those are the first 10 Ethereum minted or the most recent 10 Ethereum minted. I've got 10 Ethereum and I'm happy. But if I ask Moish to send me his LeBron James NFT and he sends me a different NFT, I'm not going to be happy about that because I wanted the original digital collectible. And that really leads us into the current discussion.
Yeah. And so I think, Ken, before we go too much further, maybe we want to also just throw up on the screen our PowerPoint that we prepared and just mention, I think it's incumbent on us to mention just that our disclaimer about this. So, just taking a step back, I don't think we did our proper introductions. Ken Falcon's the managing partner of Falcon Rappaport and Berkman. I am partner and head of the intellectual property practice. Ken and I additionally are co-chairs of our emerging technologies practice, which has been getting busier and busier now as NFTs and intellectual property and all sorts of things are causing all sorts of really interesting and difficult questions for all sorts of different people that are existing in the NFT marketplace. So disclaimer, just put this out there, general information only. It's not legal or financial advice. It's not particular to anyone here. And everything that we're talking about is in a context of a really, really, really rapidly evolving ecosystem. We may say something that is true today that may not be true tomorrow, or we may be saying something that we think is true, but in actuality is way more complicated than we anticipate. Hopefully that's not the case, but we've been surprised before. In general, and this is what we already talked about a little bit, just reviewing the NFT market, right? There's that layer of blockchain, on top of that's cryptocurrency, and then tokens, fungible, non-fungible tokens. And then this leads me to the biggest question about NFTs, which is, well, what are they? And how do you know that they are what they are? And are they authentic, right? So if Barack Obama releases a tweet, says, here's my first NFT, you probably have a good link and well, his verified Twitter account released that tweet. I can go ahead and buy it and know that it's related to him. But, you have to verify that link. And then 10 years from now, when that token is still being retraded, hopefully, how do you know that that was the exact one that was originally linked back to the official celebrity release? To me, that's the largest problem in NFTs right now. And I don't think there's a really obvious solution. If people have thoughts about it, we can, towards the end of the discussion, start opening it up for back and forth and discussion on and questions and things like this.
We should probably say that anyone who wants to post questions, you can post them in either chat or Q&A. And at the end of this program, we'll be opening them up and taking a look. If you post them there and we don't get to them during the program, we will email you back responses. Then the program is being recorded and a recording will be available to send out.
Okay. So here we get to, the topic of our discussion today was intended to reach out to people that are creatives, artists, musicians, intellectual property holders, content creators, media companies, things of those nature, right? And I think those are a lot of the people that have interest and have been creating NFTs and are interested in getting into the NFT space. And those are also a lot of the companies that we've been dealing with in our practice and advising them, on different things in terms of creating NFTs, collaborating with other artists, copyright holders, licensees, things like that, right? So here we have a list of all the other stakeholders that, are involved in this, and this is probably not exhaustive, but there's a number here, right? So technical block, let's go back a little bit, is meant to encompass a lot that's going on here, right? We have the blockchain, we have developers, we have platforms, we have people that are building technological solutions. I think there's a lot of overlap, right? If you're an IP owner, you're going to need to collaborate with someone like that, either to release your NFTs on an open platform, for example, like OpenSea, or if you're going to have someone build, your NBA properties, you're having Dapper Labs build you out a custom marketplace, right? So there's still all of this kind of falls back on the technical stack, the blockchain, what's happening there, what's technologically feasible is going to give the IP owners and creatives the ability to go out there and release things and hopefully make some money in the process. So, but then there's the flip side, right? There's people that are buying into this market, that are buying NFTs. There's investors in the ecosystem, besides just buying the NFTs. There's celebrities, athletes. There's physical spaces like galleries that are saying, well, we've been closed for the last year. Maybe we should be doing NFTs, right? Or maybe there should be some link from the physical space to the digital space where we can display digital art in our physical space. And there's all sorts of interesting ideas that are developing around there. And then there's service providers, right? There's people that are, art gallery owners and agents, agents to, media companies or artists, things of that nature. There's attorneys, accountants, all sorts of different people that have clients or people they work with that want to enter the space, and they want to help them do that in a way that's safe, effective, minimizing risk, and maximizing upside. Right. So, Ken, any thoughts here? Did I miss anything?
I don't think you missed anything, although I want to expand the scope of our disclaimer yet more, just because we're not going to be touching on the regulatory aspects of this, but the importance of that really can't be overstated. The minting of an NFT and the sale of an NFT implicate the regulatory jurisdiction of literally dozens of federal and state agencies, because this issue simply hasn't been squarely addressed, right? The technology is so new that the government has not addressed it. So the SEC says these are securities. FINRA might say that they're, sorry, not FINRA. Oh my God. FinSec is going to say that this is currency, right, being transmitted, and you need anti-money laundering considerations, and things of that nature. State agencies that regulate money transmission, money transmitter laws, all come into play here, and are very important. So before anyone just jumps into this situation without understanding that, especially on the, let's say, on the minting and creation side, where you intend to sell something to the public, you really need to think through those aspects of things. But we are not going to talk about that today, because that stuff is just beyond the scope of our personal skill sets, I think, to a limited extent, and something that we would encourage you to speak to a regulatory specialist about. We have those people, in our network, and we're happy to connect you as necessary. But we're going to focus on the IP side of things. So I think we should go on.
I think it's a very important disclaimer, and a good. I mean, I think a lot of people are ignoring that and just jumping in and not thinking about it. Just a reminder that that's what happened in 2017 with all the ICO. There's a wave of initial coin offerings. Everyone said this sounds amazing. It's the future of decentralized money raising for investment. And 4 years later, here in 2021, the SEC is now sending letters, suing companies, things like that, right? So there are no regulations specific to NFTs today that we're aware of, by any state or there's been some public statements which are, these might be securities, basically. Be wary. So definitely take that mindset. I think a lot of people are just biting the bullet, ignoring that, which I think, depending on what you're planning to do, might be a significant risk. So I think we'll just move on from there. So, I think the other helpful thing for a lot of people is framing, how are you going to, if you're going to release an NFT, or if you're going to combine your artwork with someone else and they're going to release an NFT, or you're just going to get involved in this ecosystem, how are you getting involved? Which platform are you getting involved with, and how are you doing it? Right. So it's technologically possible, Ethereum, just to, or some other blockchain that enables NFTs, to just go directly to that blockchain and execute a smart contract on that blockchain by which your NFT is released to the wild, and you can do what you want with it. I think that requires a pretty significant amount of technical ability, which most people are not doing. Although as an art project, it could be fun. But I do know, for example, one of the coolest NFT projects that I've seen is one called Euler Beats, EULERBEATS, which is a music NFT that the code for the NFT exists directly on the blockchain. And by code for the NFT, the code for the music that is being performed by the NFT exists on the blockchain. So it's not like linking to a JPEG hosted on a site somewhere. All of the code that you are required to execute the NFT on the blockchain exists within the NFT. So there's all sorts of cool things that, if you have the technological ability to do it, you can do some really crazy, innovative, amazing things that maybe weren't possible, more than a few years ago. I think most people are skipping that first step and are, going to either steps 2 or 3, which is to release it on something like OpenSea, for example, is a platform which exists primarily as like it's similar to the open thing, right? You're just using the platform as an on-ramp to build and release your NFT. And then the next option would be something that's more of a closed platform. I think there's different variations of how this is working, but basically you're requiring someone to create a username and login. You're requiring them to agree to all sorts of terms and conditions, which some of the hybrid platforms might be doing as well. And then you're allowing things like credit cards and things like that to be used, but you're also it's running on the blockchain perhaps, but it's also going to be a little bit more on guide rails. At least that's the idea.
Yeah, I think it's interesting to note that, so just so people, I think this kind of goes back to the essence of the NFT and exactly what it is that you're selling. So as Moish said, there is a mechanism to sell something directly on the blockchain, like the music code that he was referring to. But a lot of people who are selling digital artwork, for instance, are first uploading it to a site. Typically, there's a decentralized platform basically that's hosted. I don't know if it's hosted on the blockchain or that it's just a decentralized platform. I don't know what would be most accurate to say. No,
the platforms are almost like any other website where they're just you're accessing them off the blockchain, but that they're creating a way for you to link to the blockchain. Now, some of them allow direct, like Web 3.0 wallet access. So if you don't know what that is, instead of connecting to the website through a username and login, you would connect to the website through your cryptocurrency wallet. And that would enable you to log into the website in a slightly different sense, right? You're logging in not with your email and password, you're logging in with your wallet. And then you can buy, sell, create using your wallet address. So that's something that the hybrid kind of catches that idea.
Yeah, and ultimately, what I think that we're going to see when it comes to selecting a platform is that a lot of, let's say, indie artists or just individual artists who are out there and who are kind of managing their own rights and managing their own content are going to tend towards the more open platforms. And the bigger names, I mean, obviously the NBA is a perfect example of this, are going to look towards these more closed or private platforms and blockchains to sell their products and to offer NFTs to the general public. And the benefit to that is that you have a lot more control over things through either a private blockchain or through a closed a closed on-ramp kind of where you can't transfer the underlying NFT off of the platform, and it has to remain within.
I see a good question out here, which I do want to address, which is there an analogy between music and other content on NFTs as compared to, say, Napster or other legal filing sharing? I think Napster is something that you consider more of like a private closed system, right? So I think if you're thinking about BitTorrent, I think that's a much better analogy. And I think the concept of blockchains as being a decentralized file sharing, content sharing system is a really good analogy. So if you understand how BitTorrent works, how there's distributed file sharing, if any one person has that file and shares it with shares it openly to the internet, other people can find that server and connect to it and download that file. The blockchain is obviously different, but I think it's the same general concept, right? It's distributed. So people from around the world are helping the blockchain run. Like there's no trust, right? You're not saying like IBM and 3 other companies are trusted to run the blockchain. Napster is trusted to run if Napster goes down, the system doesn't work anymore, right? As what happened basically. If Spotify goes down, you can't access the site. If OpenSea goes down on the blockchain, you can still access Ethereum. You can still trade NFTs that were created on the OpenSea platform directly on the Ethereum blockchain. Just as you could continue, if a certain BitTorrent tracker goes down, you could still use a different tracker. You could still share that file through the BitTorrent protocol, separate from whether any particular trusted BitTorrent tracker allows you to share that file. So I think there's a lot of, if you're someone that's familiar with that space, and there's a lot of, I think, analogies that can be drawn from that. And I think some of the business models that we're seeing now probably derive like exactly from that. And I think perhaps this is like the next generation of that. But instead of, downloading, right? And you can think of on blockchain, on BitTorrent, those files are fungible, right? You can, you have a pirated version of your favorite movie. You can download infinite copies. You could share infinite copies. There's no, it doesn't matter which one's which, right? Whereas what the interesting part about NFTs is you can say, this is the authentic, digitally signed, verified version of that file. And that particular file is, so that's where there's value, right? So you can say this, and I think it also gets value to people that own IP, because then it allows you to intersect with the concept of digital rights management, right? So you're as the rights holder verifying that this is an authorized, legitimate version, and hopefully able to get some royalties back from that. And then another question would be about special problems with marketing NFTs. And I think the definitive answer is yes. I don't, if you have more particular question, I'd be happy to.
Yeah,
we'll get there in a little bit, I think. And so I think one of the big things, just going to the next slide here, that people are really excited about in NFTs is the concept of royalty sharing. I own IP, I'm selling my music, my art, my whatever it is, and I'm going to get money for that sale. And then really exciting is, well, I sell it to Ken, I get money for my sale to Ken. Ken now sells it to our other partner, Jeff Berkman. I, as the original creator, would get a royalty from that second sale. So it can circumvent the concept of the first sale doctrine in the physical world, and it creates a new potential opening for a digital first sale, a second sale doctrine, I guess. Now there's some problems with that, because it's not quite fully baked yet in the way that it works on the blockchain. Ken, I mean, before we go into this, is probably a little bit too technical for some people. But so before we kind of dive off into the deep end, I mean, do you want to speak more generally about resale royalties?
Yeah, I mean, so obviously, generally speaking, right? If I buy a piece of art from someone and then I go and I resell that piece of art, I'm not paying any royalty. The concept here is that you can program a smart contract, or rather, the technology exists to program a smart contract, so that the royalties will go to the originator's wallet. So if I create an NFT, while the technology is complicated, and Moishe is going to get into the specifics of what is currently available and how this happens and what the future is looking like here. The concept is that you can program in a royalty, and you can set the rate. You can set it to 0 and you don't have to take any piece of it. But if it is otherwise transferred afterwards, as long as it's done using the right kind of smart contract, you can have it be that any transfer that takes place of that NFT results in a royalty going back to the original wallet. And an important piece here that we haven't touched on, but that people with a passing knowledge of cryptocurrency know, and people who might not be as familiar don't know, is just that wallet access and security is really critical. And being able to access your own records is important. The downside to a decentralized system like this is that there's no recourse to any third party to access your property, right? If you go to a bank and you can't log into your online portal, you're going to call customer service, you're going to get in, no problem. Same thing when you have like custodial wallets, like with Coinbase, right? If you get locked out of your Coinbase account, it's a giant pain in the ass, but you can eventually get into your Coinbase account. But when it comes to, you know, just wallet access on the blockchain, there is no administrator. It's totally decentralized. And the whole idea is that if you forget it, and or if you don't have access to it anymore, you don't have your password, you don't have your private keys, it's no longer accessible. And there's an unlimited list of horror stories of people who have millions of dollars in Bitcoin sitting around in wallets that they can't access because they don't know the passwords or they don't have their private keys. So that's another important thing to note for anyone thinking about jumping in. But as far as royalties, I think I'll turn it back over to you, Moish, as far as the on-platform situation, off-platform situation, and the new technology that's currently being proposed to solve that problem.
Yeah, no, it's a really good point about wallet access. And I think also for creators, for IP holders, it's something to consider in terms of, you know, a lot of these transactions are being done collaboratively, right? You're having someone come in and help you or co-create something with you, and one or the other is going to be releasing the NFT. So right now, I know that there's ways around this potentially, but generally speaking, there's one wallet that accesses the NFT platform or the blockchain, and if you want to share royalties, you're falling back onto the trusted system, right? Is I trust Ken when he gets royalties for sale of our joint NFT to share with me the proceeds, just like I would have in the conventional license world, right? With audit rights and all sorts of dispute mechanisms and wacky things that come with being in a licensor licensee relationship. So we're still, for the time being, at least, in that world until there's a knockout automated solution, which I'm sure will come, that will solve that problem. The separate problem on royalty resales, getting back to the PowerPoint, is Ethereum runs on certain standards, right? That it's a computer code, and the code exists, and that's how the computer code executes, is because that's what the code says. So right now there is a Ethereum standard for royalties card called ERC 721. And what that does is it creates the ability to receive royalties, but it doesn't specifically talk about this resale royalty, which is that's coming from those additional platforms like OpenSea, Foundation, Rarible, Nifty Gateway. They are building on top of the blockchain, on top of this Ethereum standard, this secondary sale royalty. The Ethereum blockchain natively does not support royalty tracking. Well, it supports it, but it doesn't require it. So if you're selling something on the OpenSea platform, and then it gets sold again, it gets sold again, it gets sold again, it gets sold again on the OpenSea platform, each one of those sales is going to generate royalty for the original wallet holder. However, if then, which is something that's allowed by Ethereum, someone takes it off OpenSea and sells it on a different platform, or sells it directly on the Ethereum blockchain, you're probably not going to get that resale royalty, because it's not something that the blockchain is going to natively understand and calculate and compute and spit back out to your wallet. So right now there is a proposal called EIP 2981, which is a proposal to create a universal royalty system for all NFTs. It's a proposal only. It's like, legislation in the Senate, right? It's working its way through the process. There might be some kinks in that prevent it from being enabled, or that stop it, or that change it. But it is something that the technical community is aware of and is working on. And I think something along those lines will be implemented, because I think it's just such an important concept, and it's such an amazing and powerful concept potentially for rights holders. But I think it's something that people should be aware of, and I don't think it's something that's being talked about enough right now. Is, well, you can get royalties forever, but like, right there's a carve out there. There's an asterisk. So I'm not sure it's something, I think it's something you have to consider and contemplate when you're releasing your NFT. Because if that's something that's important to you and that's the reason you're doing it for it, then and someone's going to take it off a platform and remove your ability to get resale royalties, and that's really important to you, then maybe you should create an environment where it can't get off that platform, right? So, for example, NBA Top Shot is something where it's a very, very closed platform. You can't really remove. It doesn't make sense really to remove the NFT from that context. And NBA is getting paid for every sale that happens on that platform, right? So there's that. That's one of the big reasons why platform selection is going to be really important, or platform construction. So let's see. Before we move on, there's an extreme example. Okay, I think that gets into what we're getting into, which is ownership rights. But I think let's talk about copyright a little bit, and I think we can then get to a couple more questions that are coming in. So, Ken, do you want to? You're the copyright guru. I think you should take the lead on this one.
Yeah, so I'll just go over the at a very high level, right? Copyright law is said to basically grant to the creator of content, right, a bundle of rights, right? The right to reproduce their work, to prepare derivative works or works that are based on whatever their original work is, to distribute copies of them, to perform the work in the case of certain performance art and things of that nature, to display the work publicly, and in the case of sound recordings, to perform them publicly by a digital audio transmission. So there's a whole set basically of rights that a content creator gets, but things get a lot more complicated when you move into the realm of licensees, right? But if we'll talk about just the copyright owner or the content creator, right? Their ability to mint an NFT of their own self-created content is really, I think, while we can't say that anything is 100% ironclad in the world of NFTs and in cryptocurrency and blockchain, it's pretty damn sure that they can do what they want with their own content. The world gets a lot more complicated when you move into the people that are borrowing their content or have bought certain aspects of their content. What changes when those people start asking, can I or can't I turn this into an NFT? And it really comes down to the big question for every licensee, which is exactly what rights you actually have. And Moish has a funny story here related to his time as an intern at where were you? Were you at Warner Music or something like that?
Yeah, I used to work at Warner Music, Atlantic Records, and this was back in the era of digital ringtones, right? So it was really popular. Everyone was selling ringtones. Ringtones were, this is before the iTunes Store, maybe about that time, and everyone wanted to make a ringtone, and the music companies thought this was going to be a huge profit generator, right? But they had all these old legacy contracts, still the existing contracts from like the 60s and 70s saying, whatever contract said back in those days. And the idea was, we have to look at a contract that was written in 1970 something to determine whether sitting here in the 2000s, we have the right to make it a ringtone based on whatever license grant was provided in that contract back in 40 years ago. So I think the same issue is something we're seeing today, right? Is 5 years ago, no one was ever contemplating NFTs, right? Even if they, so the question is, well, if I have a legacy contract license grant and it doesn't have everything, it doesn't say, and all new media throughout the universe for all time in any context, whatever, some really broad grant like that, it has something more limited. Well, what is the limitation there? And is it going to provide you the right to create an NFT relying on that license grant? And so I think there's going to be a lot of people in that situation, and I think people have to go back to, whoever granted the license if they can, and see if, or review the document and see if they have that right, or if they need to get additional rights. A lot of the NFT releases now involve, people promoting things, doing, celebrities being involved. So even if you have the right, maybe you want to go back and get additional rights so that there's some sort of marketing campaign, publicity campaign alongside that, right? That may not be part of just a limited license grant. It might be something you need to go back and get more of. With the ultimate goal of, like, you don't want to be selling something more than you have the right to sell. You don't want to be selling something that's infringing, and once you do, then you're in trouble. You've breached a license agreement. You've done something else. You don't want to have co-collaborators that you're working on, and you're not all aligned. You're doing the same thing, and it's just going to cause problems. It's going to cause disputes. It's not good for everyone. That's the idea.
And it really, the whole issue here as well is just, now if you are a content owner or a content creator, right, and you put your content into, if you create an NFT using your content, right, what is the scope of the license that you're currently granting, right? What are you granting just by minting the NFT, and then by selling it? What rights are you actually transferring? It's possible for you to transfer just a copy, right, and a limited right to display. It's also possible for you to sell your copyright as an NFT, or to sell your royalty rights themselves as an NFT, meaning off blockchain royalty rights, something different than what we were discussing previously. But what exactly is the scope of the license, and what exactly are you selling? Obviously the implied license issue has not yet been, squarely decided by any court, just because, or at least as far as I know, because the issue hasn't been challenged. But if I create an NFT of, an original digital artwork, and I say this is a one-of-one original and there will never be another original, exactly what rights am I giving away? And a lot of that is going to be dictated by, the technical savvy of the user, and whether they just did this on their own on the blockchain, whether when they sold it pursuant to a contract, or for the vast majority of users who are actually using, a platform, what do the platform's terms and conditions actually say that you are selling? And what about the things that you can program into your smart contract are going to bind you in the future?
Right. And if they can bind within that platform, or if it gets taken off the platform, is that still going to be binding outside of that environment? And then you raised a good question about, well, if you're selling something else, right, like a royalty stream, is that now wading into the idea of, a fractionalized investment, something that might be more akin to a securities offering, right? And so then you start wading into the deep end of the regulatory compliance scheme that I think we want to avoid our discussion on today. So there's really interesting. I mean, but right. So all these things, you can join a platform, and I've seen it, and there's kind of a menu of options of what do you want to offer out to the world? How so, like, as a IP attorney, the concept that I can just go on a platform and without any written contract saying so, like, assign my ownership of copyright to some third party without even knowing who they are, what country they live in, what they're going to do with it. That's pretty scary, and I wouldn't recommend anyone do that. But that's technologically feasible now. So the question is, like, well, what are you doing there? I mean, same thing, right? Are you granting the purchaser, another thing I've seen, the right to make commercial use of your NFT, right? And then what does that mean? Or do you know what that means? And if they do something then that you don't like, right? They make some commercial use that you're uncomfortable with or would prefer that they stop, what recourse do you have? If someone duplicates your NFT, what recourse and then there's a question here that if someone that gets back to the question of authenticity. If there's different NFTs that have been released by different people that purport to both be the original version of whatever's being released, as a consumer, how do you know that, which is real? And as the creator, how do you potentially stop a duplicate or enforce your intellectual property rights on or off the blockchain? I think on the blockchain is going to be really difficult. And on some of these platforms, they provide a notice and takedown scheme that might also be somewhat difficult to navigate, but potentially possible. But what good is that if you take it down off a platform, but then it can still be freely traded on the blockchain with or without that platform? So there's a lot of kind of wild and wacky questions that I'm confident creators and licensees and IP attorneys are going to be scratching their heads about for a while now, that are raised by all of what's going on right now.
And it's also it's important to note that for that exact reason, right, the selection of the platform is really critical, because certain platforms have know your customer, anti-money laundering kind of mechanisms in place, right? Some of them have you go as far as literally uploading a copy of your driver's license in order to transact. So for those kinds of places, at least the content creators would be more comfortable listing and selling their NFTs in a place like that, where hypothetically, if there's an infringer, you might be able to trace it back to a specific person or a specific user. That being said, that is not the majority of platforms. That is a very select few, and mostly in connection with a private blockchain, something being offered by Dapper Labs or one of their competitors.
All right, so I think we'll just keep it moving, because I think we're almost done with the PowerPoint, and then we'll leave some time for questioning at the end. The copyright and fair use question is something we've gotten a lot of, and I think is really interesting. And there was just a Supreme Court case decided on fair use like this week, which I think I don't know if we need to read everything here, but this Supreme Court case, Google versus Oracle, Justice Breyer just decided about the scope of computer program copyright, which I think directly relates to NFTs, because they are, although the blockchain itself is open source, we're talking about fair use in the context of computer programs and representation of art within that context. And it's distinguishing between expressive and functional features of computer code, where those fixtures are mixed. It can focus on the legitimate need to provide incentives to produce copyrighted material, while examining the extent to which yet further protection creates unrelated or illegitimate harms in other markets or to the development of other products. So just this week, there's a fair use case at the Supreme Court where I think it's pretty illustrative that fair use in the context of NFTs is really complicated and is going to be really, really fact dependent, right? So if I take a meme and I release it onto the internet and I get $620,000 for the sale of that, is that a fair use? Or have I just infringed someone's copyright? Who is the copyright holder of Nyan Cat? I don't know. Is there a way you can find them out and get rights to do that? Or did you just create something that is infringing? Or is it something because you're now creating it as an NFT, there's some artistic transformative purpose of that? Ken, I mean, do you have a thought here?
Yeah, I mean, when it comes to, I guess in the end, if there is a copyright holder for Nyan Cat, you would imagine that person, would I guess they would need some amount of notoriety to really be able to sell an NFT as a genuine original, right? When the sale is of something that purports to be a true general original, I think the fair use argument for any third party is going to go out the window, right? Because you're directly competing with the original owner's marketplace, and you're just taking whatever they had turning it into an NFT via whatever mechanism and then selling it. But when you take something that might be public domain or is just so widely distributed and copied that you don't really know which work are people coming off of, I think that the fair use question gets a lot more gray. And certainly the inquiry is, as everyone always says, very, very fact specific. And we do have kind of a list of the factors that a court is going to weigh in considering whether a use is a fair use. And also a couple of recent cases that just came down in the Second Circuit, especially on the question of fair use. So the broadly speaking, the categories that are going to be considered when analyzing fair use are the purpose and character of the use, right? Whether it's commercial or nonprofit. So, again, if you're just selling an NFT on a platform, I think that's going to cut against you. The nature of the copyrighted work, how unique it is, things of that nature. The amount and substantiality of the portion used. Did you just take a photograph and post an exact copy on the internet, or did you use that photograph as part of a larger collage of images or something else, something that would be transformative, as in the Prince Carew case? I can't pronounce that the other last name. And the effect of the use on the potential market for or the value of the copyrighted work.
So Ken, how do NFTs change this? Like which one of these factors do you think are most, at least potentially, warped by the concept of releasing? I mean, I guess it's going to depend on what the original artwork is and what you're specifically doing it with in the context of NFTs. But I would think factor one, the purpose and character of the use, whether it's commercial or nonprofit. Well, this is probably going to be, if you're selling an NFT and you're looking to get money for it, it's probably on the commercial side of things, right? But what's the purpose and character of that use in the NFT context?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to imagine a use of an NFT that is not ultimately going to be commercial, right? You could say that something, so let's take for an example the Van Halen case with the guitar, right? The photo of Eddie Van Halen playing the guitar that's used as part of a museum exhibit, right? Probably fair use. So if a museum decides that they're going to sell their tickets to their Eddie Van Halen exhibit, right, and their tickets are going to be sold as an NFT, right, and you're going to get this kind of collectible ticket, right, that has an image on it, and that image is the Eddie Van Halen image, you're probably going to fall into the fair use category, or at least.
Interesting. I was thinking you were going the other way there.
Let's say you could fall into the fair use category depending on the nature of what you're doing, right? Are you buying the ticket for its collector's value because it has the picture of Eddie Van Halen on it? Or are you buying the ticket because you want to be able to get into the exhibit, and it just happens to have let's say a thumbnail or a portion of the Eddie Van Halen image?
Well, but that's so the case itself, just to give a little factual background, is the museum in the context of of having the physical guitar in the museum on display as part of a musical presentation, had basically an image placard to the right of it showing how the guitar was used in concert by Eddie Van Halen. So it's like, well, this is like literally factual of how it was used in the real world. We're just demonstrating what it looks like when it's on stage with the musician, right? Whereas you're saying now you're saying the museum could make what I would say, even though it's perhaps a nonprofit museum for an educational purpose, is using that for the commercial aspect of selling a ticket. Well, that seems more commercial to me. So I think Ken and I disagree on the fair use aspect here. But you see, like, there's just this week, there's been 3 or 4 pretty prominent copyright decisions that I think, on the one hand, help contextualize some of these fair use questions in the context of computer programs and NFTs, perhaps, but that maybe even make some of these factual questions more difficult or just more factually sensitive. So everyone has to like, well, what can I do this with my NFT? And it's like, well, it's really fact specific. Yeah. So I think we let's I think move on from fair use just so we can kind of close up and take a few questions. What's next for NFTs? I think we've already discussed the risk and regulatory vacuum that exists out there right now, and hopefully that will crystallize to some extent, and there'll be regulatory guidance issued, and perhaps best practices will emerge and things like that. I think, again, we're going back to the concept of this exists within the realm of blockchain and cryptocurrency and other sorts of fungible tokens. So if you're just getting to the cryptocurrency world and you haven't had the battle scars of Bitcoin going from 0 up to 20,000, back down to $6,000 in the past year, right? You could have bought Bitcoin this like 12 months ago for under $7,000. If you're not prepared to withstand a 90% drop in value in whatever you're doing, either don't enter this market or get prepared for that, because people ask, well, what do you think is going to happen? And the pricing is going to go up, and this, and the pricing it went down 20% this week. It's like, well, a 20 or 30% move in cryptocurrency, like if you've been in this market for, like Ken and I have been advising cryptocurrency companies since 2014, like you don't even notice that. So if a 30% move, it concerns you, like be careful.
A client of mine likes to talk about how he literally woke up overnight, and of his $300,000 in cryptocurrency that he had lost $100,000 while he was sleeping. He just, and while the stock market certainly fluctuates, right? I think that was the great quote from I can't remember who it was. It might have been JP Morgan. I can't remember what it was, but it was just, what can you say about the stock market definitively? And the answer was the market will fluctuate. It doesn't fluctuate like that. Okay. But the cryptocurrency market is not nearly as regulated and is subject to just crazy price swings. So that goes to the
I heard this week that it's a hyper volatile asset class. Right. So that's what NFTs are, because they exist in this ecosystem, and there's all sorts of things you can do with them, but you have to realize that it's ultimately part of the ecosystem. Right. And the people that are buying these things are part of that ecosystem and have a mindset that's part of the ecosystem. So, yes, I think it's going to become more mature. I think we're going to continue to see technical breakthroughs, perhaps even as it relates to royalties. But, that's the landscape I think that we see. We're gonna we have a couple questions that have already come in that I want to get to now. Feel free to put some in. Ken, I don't know if you have a hard stop at 1 o'clock. I know we're right now at the time, so if you feel like you got to go, feel free to go. We'll try and stick around for at least a little bit and answer some of the questions that have already come in.
Before I have to stop. So
okay. Do you? Yeah. So let's see. One question: if I'm an art gallerist and I'm planning to sell NFTs that the artists represent, how can I protect them and their copyright? Can I sell the NFTs on the platforms? And what should I do to protect their ownership and copyright? And is there any ownership and copyright issues that relate to my business? Yeah, I think this is a really good question. Something we've gotten a lot of in the past couple months is, I'm working with artists and I want to help them, sell NFTs in a way that's safe, protective of, of their rights, of what they've created, hopefully going to generate value for them and for you, but also in a way that's going to be protective both of you doing whatever you're doing and of the artist's artwork and market image and perception and value. And I think it's a good question. It's a tough question, but I think the answer is you have to just learn as much as you possibly can, work with people that know about the area and that can guide you to places that perhaps are going to, some of these platforms are doing, I think, a better job than others in terms of creating a safe space or a safer space than just the wild west. But it is ultimately so I mean, at some point you're going to have to take some risks. So the question is, are you taking those risks with the buy-in of the artists and with their knowledge and participation and understanding, or something else? And if so, how are you getting to that understanding? How are you developing buy-in? What particular, is there an agreement? Is there some understanding? We would obviously recommend that there be some written agreement to document what's happening and to predict and anytime you can predict a risk and contract for it and delegate whose risk that is, it's going to prevent issues down the road. So, Ken, other thoughts on something like that?
Yeah, I mean, this I would say the big things to focus on are, number one, platform selection, right? And what representations you're making through that platform. If you are saying this is a one-of-one original artwork that will never be replicated or sold anywhere else as an NFT, you better stick to that. But just as important as that is making sure you have a real live paper contract with your artist, saying that they're not going to go and do it, right? Because as a gallerist in this particular example, you don't usually own the underlying copyright to the work. So if you're going to put handcuffs on the artist and say you're not creating any more than one of these, you need to make sure that is authorized. You need to make sure that if it's going to be posted on more than one platform, that it's going to be something that's permitted by that artist. I mean, and ultimately that's all going to be governed by the garden variety contract, the paper contract between you and the artist who's selling through you. Is it possible for you to mint NFTs on more than one platform? Yes. Can the artist authorize you to do that? Yes. Can you do something on one platform that constitutes an agreement not to do it on another platform? Also, yes. And whose head do you think it's going to come down on if you mint it on one of those platforms and make certain representations and then go ahead and breach those representations, right? So that's why I kept kind of getting back to platform selection, really critical, and the scope of any license or any agreement also very critical.
But also, I think buy-in with the artist, right? If they're not comfortable with what you're doing and what platform, and they're doing it begrudgingly because you're telling them that NFTs are all the rage, and that's I think you want to hopefully have some rapport and understanding and bring them along for the ride. And I think also from a market perspective, if they're participatory in that, it might lead to a better outcome. I hope that answers your question. Another question, 3 years from now, do you see NFTs being a more commercially focused product or more of a marketing engagement product? I think both. I think we're really scratching the surface of what NFTs can be and how they're going to be used. I was quoted in an article in a newspaper this week saying, I think the current uses are somewhat basic, right? It's which I think was a little bit mean, but I don't think necessarily unfair. I think it's right now a lot of what's happening is, well, I'm uploading a JPEG into an NFT and selling it for the highest market price and just taking the money and running. And I don't really like. Sure, I mean, if you can do it, I guess to some extent, right? But it doesn't seem to be like a really taking advantage of the technical opportunities here. So there's nothing wrong with. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with doing that. I'm just saying, like, that's like the really basic level stuff here. And I think as we start seeing these technological advances that are being built underneath the platform, like more advanced royalty sharing, like combining with perhaps more engaging marketing campaigns, perhaps combining with real world events and spaces and galleries and music events and ticketing and all sorts of things like that, right? I think everything this enables a lot of things that weren't possible before. I think it's hard to describe some of those things because we're not seeing it in the real world right now for a number of different reasons. But I think those plans are out there, and we've already seen, like, Kings of Leon do a combination offering of concert ticketing and VIP experiences in combination with an NFT. That seems like a really good example of like a way you can be creative about marketing, engaging a product. I mean, me personally, I released one of my blog posts about IP and NFTs as an NFT, which I, as far as I know, was the first example of that. I think for all sorts of different industries, primarily artists and creative people and people that own IP, there's going to be really interesting things you're going to be able to do with these things, and really interesting combinations of real and digital that haven't been able to exist before because the technology to enable it didn't exist. And so here we are.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. Additionally, right, I think that you're going to see a couple of different things. You're going to see different markets develop, right? Right now, the market that's getting the most action right now is the collector's market. And it's funny because I said to Moish, the people that are going to make $1 billion are the people that are going to be the Facebook of NFTs and are going to develop a platform to view and collect and trade NFTs in the collector's context, right? So you're going to have your digital portfolio. Like imagine you have that binder full of baseball cards from back in the day that you want to sit down and show to your friends. Now you can show your friends, and you can also show people online, and then you can also sell to them potentially through that same platform. Then about a week later, I think Mark Cuban announced that he's designing a platform to do pretty much exactly that. So if anyone knows where I can name him in my lawsuit for stealing that idea from me, I'll just let me know.
That's right. He must have been listening into your conversation with me.
Yeah, but when it comes to the marketing piece, the marketing piece is potentially huge, because at the same time, right, you're displaying things that are collector's items. You're going to be able to give to people in connection with whatever events that you're trying to sell to. You're going to give to people something that they can collect and display, and that's going to be beneficial for you because they're going to be displaying, the Met Museum ticket with the Eddie Van Halen picture on it, and so people are going to be thinking about the Met Museum. They're going to be thinking about Eddie Van Halen. The marketing opportunity is huge as that goes on, but also you're going to see the commercial aspects of this really blow wide open when people start using NFTs to transfer real assets, real estate, pieces of corporations and things like that.
Yep. All right. Well, I think we're going to, on that note, start wrapping this up here. If we didn't get to your question, and I know there's a few that are still out there that we didn't get to, we would invite you to follow up with us afterwards. I had it up there, but our emails are mpelts@FRBlaw and kfalcon@FRBlaw, or just email info@FRBlaw.com. Feel free to email us anytime. We wish everyone, we thank everyone for attending, for spending your Friday afternoon with us, or morning, depending on where you're coming from. And we wish you good luck out there. And if there's anything we can do to help you or any of your clients or other people you work with, feel free to reach out, and have a good one. Take care.
Be well.